I never thought a single ordinary evening could destroy 15 years of a happy life. But what I saw inside her car turned my world upside down so completely, there was no way back. It was the moment I truly felt fear for the first time. Not fear for our marriage, but for the truth that was about to surface. The truth I could no longer outrun, even if I desperately wanted to. But before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand the life we lost. Because nothing collapses louder than something you once believed was perfect. We met the way people meet when love arrives without warning. No plan, no signal, no cinematic backdrop. Just two shopping carts colliding in the Trader Joe's parking lot. She got embarrassed, apologized softly, tucked her hair behind her ear, and somehow I felt, immediately, that this person was going to stay in my life for a long time. Maybe forever. And if someone had told me that out loud in that moment, I wouldn't have been surprised. There was something about her that felt like home right away. Emily was a school counselor, the kind of woman who always carried papers, coffee, keys, another folder, and somehow kept all of it from falling. She lived fast but warmly. She laughed sincerely, listened carefully, answered honestly. Even when she had no energy left, she somehow found enough for everyone else. For the kids at school, for her friends, for me. Our first dates were so simple that I remember them with a warmth that almost hurts. We sat in a tiny restaurant, shared an enormous plate of pasta, laughed every time the wobbly table shook. She told me how she dreamed of starting a club for students someday, and I told her how I once got lost in an IKEA parking lot and almost called a tow truck to rescue myself. Everything with her felt easy, as if we'd known each other for years. A month later, we were already driving through Costco, arguing about which paper towels absorb better, and why we even needed a pack of 30. 3 months later, we were planning a trip to the coast. 6 months later, I couldn't imagine waking up without the sound of her breathing beside me. I proposed in winter, on one of those rare days when Portland is covered in snow. She walked down our street, looking around in confusion, because I had left little paper hearts along the path leading to my house. She stepped onto the porch, saw me holding the ring, and said, "Yes," before I even opened my mouth. In that moment, it felt like the sky got brighter, and that it would stay that way forever. The wedding was small, warm, almost homemade. Her father grilling burger patties on a huge Blackstone. My mother pouring champagne into plastic cups. Emily's sister hanging string lights that glowed warmer than our whole house. We danced barefoot on the grass, listened to music from an old speaker, and laughed through the entire evening. Even years later, I remembered the smell of that night. Smoke, orange-scented candles, and her perfume. Then came the house. Our suburban 2-story home with the white porch. The loud neighbor's dog. The mailbox I promised to replace every spring. We lived there the way real families do. On Sundays, I made pancakes. She brewed coffee in her big green mug. In the evenings, we watched shows, argued playfully about who had more to do the next day, took Christmas photos by the fireplace. We picked out furniture in IKEA, assembled it late at night, argued about instructions that always seemed unnecessary. We drove to the ocean on the 4th of July, grilled corn, listened to the waves, watched people launch fireworks louder than common sense should allow. We lived 15 years as if the world had been built for the two of us. No big fights, no cold nights, no unspoken secrets, no cracks in the walls. And that's why everything that happened later hit with a force no one could survive gracefully. Our marriage didn't collapse in one day. It began falling apart from a single glance. From the moment I saw her car parked where it should never have been. From the moment I realized that whatever I was about to discover inside, there would be no way back. Until that day, our life looked like the kind of story people brag about at suburban barbecues. Steady, cozy, warm, almost picture perfect. We lived the way couples live when they're sure they've found their place in the world. In the mornings, our home filled with the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread. I read the news on my tablet. Emily scrolled through Pinterest looking for garden ideas. Kids played ball behind the fence. And all of it felt so right it sometimes scared me with its simplicity. We loved neighborhood fairs that everyone attended like they were holidays. We bought corn wrapped in foil, listened to local musicians, argued about whose lemonade was better, the Johnsons or the Lopez's. Emily adored those events because someone always said, "You and Michael are such a harmonious couple," and she glowed when she heard it. On Saturdays, we drove to Home Depot. I could spend an hour choosing tools I would probably never use. While Emily studied houseplants and said every time, "Let's take this one. It'll make the house feel warmer." We had so many plants that I used to joke we lived in a botanical garden. She laughed, and the house felt even more alive because of it. In the evenings, we made family dinners. Even if it was just pasta with Jared sauce. We'd sit on the porch, listen to the pines rustling, talk about plans for the next weekend, and dream about trips we'd someday take. Emily always said she wanted to see Vermont in the fall, when everything turns red and gold. I promised I'd take her there one day. We went to the lake, grilled hot dogs on a disposable grill, rented a small boat, splashed near the shore like kids. We took pictures, laughed, made silly faces like we were 20 again. A miniature American dream. Simple, quiet, real. Even our weekdays were full of rituals. She called me every lunch break. I left notes for her on the fridge. We picked evening movies together, usually old films she loved. Our only arguments were over small things. Who left the light on? Who forgot the milk? Who should take out the trash? Those arguments didn't hurt. They made life feel alive. You could film that life in a commercial titled, "What Home Feels Like." Anyone would dream of living that way. And I truly believed we had what people call the perfect family. And that's why, what I saw later, didn't just break me. It erased everything I believed in. The first signs appeared so quietly that I barely noticed them at all. Life was too settled, too calm, too familiar for anything foreign to slip into it. I thought it was just fatigue, the change of seasons, work overload. But now, looking back, I understand. Anxiety never arrives loudly. It whispers before it ever dares to scream. Emily started coming home later. Not by hours, by 30, 40 minutes. She explained it with meetings, traffic, parents who kept her talking again. And it all sounded believable. She was always the kind of person who wanted to help everyone. But then the details appeared. Small, subtle, but impossible to ignore. Her phone, which used to lie anywhere, on the kitchen table, on the couch, by the bed, was now always with her. In her pocket, under her pillow, in her zip bag. And every time it vibrated, she turned away just a little more than necessary to check the screen. Natural, casual, yet something inside me registered it. The way a person notices the smell of smoke without seeing fire. One day she said she'd be late because of an important conversation with the history teacher. But when I called her, she answered too quickly, as if she'd been holding the phone in her hand, waiting for the call. Her voice trembled, not from guilt, but from tension. She said she couldn't talk, that it wasn't a good moment, and hung up immediately. I stood in a grocery store parking lot, milk in my hand, and felt something I couldn't name. Not fear, not anger, more like a shift, as if something in our life had turned slightly, and my skin felt the change before my mind did. The next day, she forgot her work badge at home. I drove over to drop it off, and when I pulled up to the school, I saw her at a distance, standing by a car, talking to someone I didn't know. A man, I think. Sports jacket, phone in hand, confident posture. And she laughed. Softly, briefly. That exact laugh I hadn't heard next to me in far too long. I didn't walk over. Didn't interrupt. Didn't want to look jealous. I told myself she had colleagues, acquaintances, parents of students. Ordinary life, ordinary conversation. But why was she standing so close? Why were her hands awkwardly clasped, like she didn't know where to put them? Why did a cold shiver run down my spine? When she came home that evening, I asked how her day was. She answered quickly, confidently, almost as if rehearsed. Fine. Exhausting. The kids were wild today. Not a single extra emotion. Not even a hint that she'd been laughing with a man hours earlier. I said nothing again. I still wanted to believe everything was just coincidence. Coincidence, that kept repeating. Days passed. The tension grew thicker. She went on walks to clear her head more often, sat longer in the bathroom, and our usual evening conversations grew shorter. Sometimes she didn't start them at all. Yet there were moments when she returned to herself. When we watched a movie and she laughed at all the right places. When she touched my hand in the kitchen. When she talked about future vacations. Those moments confused me. Sometimes I thought the problem was only in my imagination. That I was tired. Too sensitive to things I used to overlook. But one night changed that. One night made it impossible to pretend the anxiety was random. She stepped out for a minute to take a walk around the neighborhood. It was cold, late. She'd never done that before. I waited 20 minutes. 30. An hour. She didn't come back. I called. She didn't answer. And for the first time in all our years together, our home felt too quiet. When she finally walked in, her cheeks were cold from the wind, but her eyes were hot, as if she had been crying. She said she was just thinking, that she lost track of time. I wanted to ask what she was thinking about, why she didn't answer, where she had been, but my voice stayed somewhere inside, refusing to come out. We went to bed side by side, as always, but something stood between us. Invisible, heavy, unavoidable. And that night, lying beside the woman I had loved my entire life, I finally allowed myself to think the thought I had been afraid to face, that the life we believed was perfect might have been hiding cracks I had refused to see for far too long. And those cracks were growing louder, as if something inside us was getting ready to break for good. After that night, when Emily said she stepped out just to get some air and returned with traces of tears on her face, our life began to change shape so subtly that anyone else might have blamed it on autumn, on fatigue, on the weather. But I knew something was happening inside her, something she was afraid to name herself. At first it was small things. She had always loved order, but now order became something like her lifeline. She rearranged the pillows 5 times, wiped a table that was already clean, put away items that were already in their place. She walked through the house slowly, as if afraid to step where the floorboards might give way. Her phone became something separate, not part of the house, but part of herself. It used to lie anywhere, on the kitchen counter, on the couch, on the dresser. Now it was always in her hand, and when it vibrated, she turned her head just enough to hide both the notification and her eyes. These were tiny movements, almost invisible, but I sensed them as clearly as a draft in a closed room. Then new habits appeared. She ate dinner with me less often. Sometimes she sat behind her laptop saying, "I need to finish a couple of reports." Sometimes she said she needed a little quiet. Sometimes she simply disappeared into the bedroom, leaving the door slightly open, as if saying, "I'm not hiding anything," but also not inviting me in. One evening, I heard her whispering to someone on the phone in the bathroom. Her voice was quiet, her words muffled by tile, but I recognized the tone instantly. The tone of someone who is afraid, not of lying, but of the truth breaking through the surface. When she came out, her eyes were faintly red. I asked, "Everything okay?" She smiled too quickly. "Of course, just a rough day." And she walked past me, kissing me on the temple, as if trying to hold on to a version of us that no longer existed. I still believed her, or maybe I wanted to believe her so badly that I pushed away every doubt. But doubts don't like to be pushed away. They come back louder. The day everything shifted, I was simply moving her car closer to the garage. A small household task, nothing serious. She had parked a little crooked, and it blocked me in for the morning. I got into her car, turned the key, and when the screen lit up, the first thing I saw was last destination, Redwood Apartments. I didn't even understand what I was looking at first. Redwood? What Redwood? It wasn't our neighborhood, not her school, not a shopping plaza, not a hospital, not her mother's house, and definitely not the library where she said she'd been preparing materials that evening. I opened the trip history. The screen showed Redwood, yesterday. Redwood, 3 days ago. Redwood, a week ago. The same address. The same complex. The same evening time. I sat behind the wheel feeling as if the car itself had shrunk around me, as if the air inside had gotten heavier, as if a ringing sound, like after a blow, had started somewhere deep in my head. I stepped out of the car, leaned against the door, and stared at our house for a long moment. At the windows, at the porch, at that old mailbox I kept promising to replace. Everything looked normal. Nothing had changed, but something inside me had cracked. I told myself she could have given someone a ride, that GPS sometimes glitches, that it could be a friend's address I didn't know about, that all of this was a string of coincidences. And yet inside me grew a feeling that felt closer to fear than anything else. Not fear for her, not fear for us, but fear of what I might soon discover. That evening, she came home a little later than usual, smiling, holding a grocery bag. She set a pie on the table and said she missed me. Everything looked so normal, it almost felt staged. But when she set her phone down, and the screen lit up for a split second, I noticed how she instinctively covered it with her palm. Quickly, gently, but exactly the way someone covers something private. We ate dinner with the TV murmuring in the background. She talked about a school event, about the kids, about her coworkers. Her voice was lively, sincere. Too sincere, as if she were trying to convince not me, but herself. That night, when she was already asleep beside me, quietly, peacefully, the way she always slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the faint creak of wood in the roof, the steady rhythm of her breathing. And all the while, something inside me pulsed with a different rhythm, uneven, restless. And that rhythm told me only one thing. If I don't stop and face the truth now, whatever this is, will tear me apart. Redwood wasn't an accident. GPS wasn't a glitch. And I knew the next step would take me to a place from which there would be no return. I listened to the air conditioner humming, to the faint crackle of wood somewhere in the roof, to Emily's breathing matching the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. But inside me something followed a different rhythm. Uneven, broken, restless. And that rhythm said only one thing. If I didn't stop now and face the truth, this lie would tear me apart. The GPS was the first crack, but I could already feel it. What lay ahead wasn't just a crack. It was a collapse. I kept telling myself the GPS could be wrong, that the address might have shown up by accident. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I didn't drive to Redwood now, I would spend the rest of my life burning in doubts. I was too afraid to test. I told Emily I'd be staying late at work, and before I even realized it, I was already turning toward that neighborhood. The drive to Redwood took less time than I expected, and the closer I got, the tighter my chest felt, as if something inside me already knew. There was no way back. Redwood Apartments looked ordinary. Identical buildings, trimmed bushes, a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. I parked far enough away not to be noticed. Minutes dragged on slowly, as if the air itself had thickened around me. Then her car. She pulled in quietly, almost deliberately unnoticed. Emily stepped out, glanced around, held her phone to her chest, and walked quickly toward one of the entrances. No hesitation, no uncertainty, as if she'd done this many times before. A couple of minutes later, the door opened again. A man stepped out. I couldn't see his face, only his silhouette. Tall, confident, wearing a light athletic jacket. He came toward her the way someone approaches. A person they've been waiting for. She said something softly, too softly for me to hear even from the car. But I saw her smile. A small, warm smile. The kind I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. A smile that sent something sharp and cold straight down my spine. He lifted his hand and touched her shoulder. A simple gesture, but it said more than any words could. She didn't pull away, didn't flinch, didn't look surprised, as if that touch was completely natural to her. I sat in the dark of my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb. My mind searched for excuses, but my body already knew the truth. Not the full truth. Not yet, but enough to understand this wasn't innocent. Not remotely. They didn't stand there long. She said something. He nodded. Emily turned and walked back to her car. He stayed in the doorway, watching her leave. The way someone watches a person who matters deeply. When she drove off, I remained there for several minutes, unable to move. Inside me, something went hollow. Not from anger, but from that awful feeling, when a world doesn't break loudly, but instead cracks quietly from the inside. I said nothing that night. Emily came home calm, casual, asked how my day was. I simply nodded. But something in me had already shifted. The GPS wasn't wrong, and Redwood wasn't a coincidence. And I knew, if I wanted the truth, the next trip there would show me everything for good. I returned to Redwood 2 days later. Not out of anger, not out of jealousy, but out of that strange feeling you get when you already know the truth, yet still need to see it with your own eyes. Just once. So you never again doubt what broke your life. I arrived early. That mattered. I needed to see everything from beginning to end, without guesses, without imagination filling the gaps. The weather was clear and dark, as if autumn had left just enough light for what was about to happen. I parked in the same spot as before. Redwood Apartments stood silent, almost asleep. A few lonely street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement, and every trembling reflection felt like a signal that something was already moving toward me. A few minutes later, her car appeared. I recognized the sound of her engine. Soft, even, as if trying not to draw attention. Emily stepped out confidently, quickly, like someone who had walked this path 100 times. She fixed her hair, glanced right, left, and headed straight toward that same door. I flicked my headlights on for a split second, just to confirm I wasn't imagining it. No, it was her. My wife. My Emily. And that was the most painful part. Not the possibility of an affair. Not even fear. But how naturally she went inside. As if she were coming home. The door closed. Silence. Minutes passed slowly. Heavy and thick. I almost drove away. Almost left things as they were. But inside me was a feeling like the cold anticipation of a blow. A blow already raised. Waiting only to come down. The door opened again a few minutes later. They stepped out together. He, the man whose back I'd seen last time. Tall, calm, confident. So calm it hit me harder than anything else. She, quiet, beautiful, familiar down to the last detail. Yet completely foreign. He said something to her. I couldn't hear the words. But I saw how she listened. How her face softened. Softer than it had been with me in weeks. How she looked at him. Like someone who had been waiting for him. For a very long time. He lifted his hand and touched her cheek. Gently, as if afraid to break the moment. Emily didn't pull away. Didn't flinch. Didn't even look surprised. She closed her eyes. And leaned toward him softly. Almost tenderly. And their brief kiss destroyed everything I'd been trying to hold together. It wasn't a kiss of passion. Not a lost moment. Not a mistake. It was the kiss of two people who had long crossed a line. From which there is no accident. A familiar kiss. Quiet. Certain. Too certain. I sat in my car barely feeling my own body. As if the world had suddenly shifted sideways. And I failed to keep my balance with it. There was no shout. No burst of rage. Only silence. Huge. Dense. Unavoidable. When she drove home, I followed at a distance. Not out of jealousy. Out of necessity. I had to walk this road to the end. She entered the house. Took off her shoes. Smiled at me as if returning from an ordinary evening. I stood at the kitchen doorway. And the words came out on their own. Emily. I was at Redwood. The light left her face instantly. As if a lid she had held on for too long. Was ripped away in one movement. She tried to inhale. The breath broke. She opened her mouth. And closed it again. No excuses. No stories. Not even an attempt to lie. Only silence. I understood everything without a single word. She knew that I knew. And I knew that she knew. Between us stood 15 years of love. And one kiss. That erased them quietly. Precisely. Completely. I didn't shout. Didn't ask why. Didn't look for someone to blame. Some things are too heavy to carry on your tongue. She took a step toward me. And stopped. We looked at each other like two people who had lost their home, yet still stood on its doorstep. I'm sorry, she whispered. Please forgive me. I nodded. Not as someone who forgives, but as someone who acknowledges a fact that can no longer be denied. In that moment, I understood the truth. Infidelity isn't the destruction of love. It's the destruction of reality. The one you lived in, believed in, built with your own hands. We didn't argue. Didn't fight. We simply stood there. Two people. Holding the pieces. Of what once was their life. I didn't sleep that night. And for the first time in 15 years, I understood that morning would come to a house. Where we were no longer husband and wife. But two people. Who would have to learn. To live separately. It was the end. Quiet. Unbearably honest. And absolutely inevitable.